Hi guys, I don't know about you, but I love to put onion in almost everything that I'm cooking. However, as you know, they do have a shelf life and you can't buy them in too large of a quantity without risking them going bad. So there are a couple of ways that I like to preserve my onion. And the first way that I started preserving was by freezing. Just chop up the onion, put it in a Ziploc bag, and put it in the freezer. And it's fantastic. They're handy. You can just grab a small little handful whenever you need it. However, if you have limited freezer space like I do, you're not going to want to have huge amounts of bags of onions sitting in your freezer. Also, they could degrade over time. They could get freezer burn and that type of thing. So I like to have a small amount in my freezer. So a few years back, I started dehydrating my onion. And here is a jar here. It's vacuum sealed. I just pulled this out of my pantry. These are so handy to have. So aside from the convenience of having them right in your cupboard, not having to peel and chop onion, you also can just use a tiny amount. Instead of cutting a whole onion and then having to store it in your fridge and worry about using it before it goes bad, you can just take a tiny little sprinkle out of your dehydrated onions and pop them into whatever you're cooking. Amazing. I've actually find that the flavor of these is even more intensified than the onions that you just chop and put in the freezer. Those are great, but the flavor of this is just so much more intense. It's fantastic. Another great thing is you don't have to rehydrate them to use them. They are so good in this dehydrated form. If you just want to sprinkle some on the top of a casserole or macaroni and cheese, something like that, anywhere where you want a little crunchy topping, mix it with some panko for anywhere that you're using panko crumbs in breading something. Anyways, please try them. Now, about the dehydrator, if you don't have a dehydrator yet, you might want to start with just a very inexpensive one. You can buy them for probably under $30 or around $30. Start with one of those if you aren't sure if you're going to be wanting to use it. And that's what I did, but eventually it was just falling apart and then I had to upgrade a little bit. Anyway, enough. Let me show you how to do it. Just one word of caution. When you are dehydrating these onions, you're probably going to want to have them outside because the smell of dehydrating onions, I can't even explain. I can't describe how strong the onion smell is. So you definitely don't want to dehydrate them in your house. All of your neighbors are going to know someone is using onion. So, it's pretty bad. So I put the dehydrator outside and then because the day is only so long, then I usually move it into the garage for the night, but there's no way you would want to dehydrate them in your house. So that's the word of caution and here we go. Okay, here we are. So the first thing you're going to need, of course, is a bunch of onions. I have 13 onions. Peel them, chop them, save your scraps that are good for soup stock. Get them on to your trays or your dehydrator. Make sure they're not squished too tight together. Try to give room for air to circulate around the onions. Get them into the dehydrator. And then I had a few onions left over, so I decided I'll just throw those on a baking sheet and I'll pop them in the freezer. So now we're outside on my deck. My dehydrator is set for 130 degrees, which was the recommended temperature by my particular dehydrator. Of course, outside because you don't want that smell inside. Then get your scraps packed up and put them in the freezer for soup stock. Now, the onions are out of the freezer, and honestly, I don't know what was wrong with me. Maybe I had too much coffee on this day, but this is the most chaotic demonstration of trying to put frozen onion in a Ziploc bag. I don't know what was wrong with me. I probably should have just put them back onto the baking sheet and started this clip over again because this is hilarious. Anyways, that's how it went. I just had a lot of trouble getting the onions into the bag. If you're going to freeze onion or celery or peppers or whatever, freeze them on a baking sheet before you put them in your Ziploc bag because once they go into that bag, if they aren't frozen, you're going to have one gigantic clump of onion. So that's why we freeze first, then bag later. So there they are. Now those can go into the freezer and they are handy whenever I want a few little bits of onion. Now here we are. This is about 26 hours later. I am bringing these in from the garage, which is where I moved my dehydrator overnight. and I stacked the trays just to carry them in. When they're nice and warm, you don't want to stack them up. You want them to have a lot of air to cool as quickly as possible, because you don't want to suddenly start generating more moisture in them. So once you get them out there, you're going to just give them a little squish, and you want to feel all of the onions. Make sure that they are nice and crispy and dry. You don't want any moisture in these onions, because once they get vacuum sealed into your jar, if you start getting any moisture in there, it'll get moldy, and then you're gonna have to throw the entire jar out. Now, I did find a couple of pieces that were a little questionable, a little too rubbery for my liking. So what I did is I ended up just getting them back out into the garage, into the dehydrator, and I left them there for, it was somewhere between 3 and 4 hours. And so that way I was really sure they were completely dehydrated. All right, so here we are a few hours later. They are nice and toasty and dried out, and I'm just gonna put them into jars. Don't squish them down too tightly, just give them a little shake, let them settle. And then this is where I use previously used canning lids. So after water bath canning, I sometimes will just save those lids, use them again, and I only use them the second time for my dried goods. So give the jars a little wipe. Make sure that there's no little bit of onion or anything on there. Get that all wiped, and then we're going to get the rings on. I just like to leave the jars somewhere in my kitchen in plain sight, so that I'm reminded every time I walk by. I just give them a little shake, make sure that they're not sticking together, make sure there's no signs of moisture in the jar. And these ones look really nice and dry. They are just nice and crunchy and crisp. And this was a jar of cabbage that I dehydrated. So same thing for the cabbage. Leave it out for a few days where you can see it. So you just continue to kind of shake it around, make sure that nothing is sticking, make sure there's no signs of moisture in your jar. If you did run into a problem where you think they were starting to stick, just pour them back onto your dehydrator trays and get them into the dehydrator for a few more hours, and they should be good. And that is that. Okay, so that's how I do it. Give it a try. You're gonna love it. Bye.